Every step echoed softly, betraying the silence she so desperately sought. The rehab's sleek, polished corridors had always struck her as a gilded cage, but here, in this dimly lit room behind a reinforced door, the true heart of the operation pulsed quietly. She glanced at the small keypad beside the door, fingers deftly punching in the stolen access code she'd memorized days ago. The green light blinked approvingly, and the door hissed open just enough for her to slip inside. The room was cramped, filled with towers of blinking servers and a single workstation occupied by a bulky monitor and keyboard. She closed the door gently behind her and exhaled, the tension in her shoulders tightening anew. Claire settled into the chair, her eyes adjusting to the pallid glow of the screen. Her fingers hovered momentarily above the keyboard, recalling every detail of the hacking tutorials she'd devoured in secret. This was no ordinary infiltration. The rehab's tech defenses were formidable, designed to protect the secrets of its wealthy clientele and the institution's shadowy dealings. She initiated the login sequence with the forged credentials, heart-pounding as layers of encryption and firewall protocols sprang up like digital sentinels. Each bypass was a calculated dance of patience and precision, a game of cat and mouse she could ill afford to lose. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she slipped past the last security barrier, granting her access to the restricted core database. The screen filled with folders and files labeled with nondescript names, but Claire's instincts guided her to financial documents first. Rows of spreadsheets and transaction logs revealed an intricate web of offshore accounts, shell companies, and wire transfers. Her eyes darted across the numbers and coded annotations, piecing together a story of greed masked beneath the guise of therapeutic care. Suddenly, a folder marked confidential communications caught her eye. Opening it, she found encrypted emails and message logs between the rehab's founder and several influential patients, including Victor. The tone was chillingly transactional, discussing favors, silenced scandals, and the disposal of inconvenient truths. A soft creak from the hallway snapped Claire's attention to the door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She hastily minimized the files and slipped the USB drive into the port, transferring the data with trembling hands. Every second stretched unbearably as footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. She froze, the glow of the monitor painting her face in ghostly light. The door handle rattled briefly, then moved away. Claire exhaled in relief, but knew the danger had only just begun. Clutching the USB tightly, she slipped back into the shadows of the corridor, the weight of what she'd uncovered pressing heavily in her mind. She had crossed a line, one that might cost her everything, but there was no turning back now. As she melted into the controlled chaos of the rehab's nocturnal rhythms, Claire's resolve hardened. The secrets behind the silk-smooth facade were unraveling, and with every thread she pulled, the stakes climbed higher. Yet, amid the tightening noose of suspicion and surveillance, her determination to find her sister and expose the truth burned brighter than ever. Her mission had evolved from mere infiltration to a dangerous gambit of power and survival. The lines between right and wrong blurred in the shadows, but Claire knew the game she'd entered was far from over. Somewhere within the labyrinth of lies and deception, the missing pieces awaited, and she would stop at nothing to find them. The quiet of the night was shattered by the distant echo of footsteps and hushed voices, a reminder that the watchful eyes of the rehab's elite were always lurking. Claire's pulse thrummed with a mixture of fear and fierce determination as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. She had crossed the line, and the game was now hers, to win or lose. With the USB secured, Claire vanished deeper into the night, the weight of the secrets it held a cold fire in her pocket. The luxury rehab center was no sanctuary. It was a battleground veiled in silken lies, and she was ready to fight. The luxury here was suffocating an opulent cage that masked the rot beneath. She had been here long enough to sense the undercurrents swirling beneath the veneer of civility, the power plays hidden behind polite smiles and silk scarves. Today, the atmosphere was thicker, charged with a tension that set Claire's nerves on edge. She found herself in the common room, an expansive space filled with plush velvet chairs and heavy curtains that dulled the afternoon light to a muted glow. The elite patients lounged in clusters, their conversations hushed but loaded with meaning, eyes flickering with suspicion and veiled threats. It was a battlefield disguised as a sanctuary. Claire's gaze drifted to Lena, the undisputed queen of this microcosm. Lena's statuesque figure was draped in shimmering silk, her pale eyes scanning the room with an imperious detachment. The woman had a reputation for controlling the patient factions here, her influence extending like roots beneath the surface. Claire's latest discoveries had clearly unsettled her. A murmur passed through the room as Claire approached a small group near the grand fireplace. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes, the silent judgment. Whispers floated to her ears, snippets of conversations about loyalty and betrayal, alliances fraying under pressure. Claire's heart quickened. She was poking a hornet's nest. As she moved closer to Lena, the air seemed to crackle. Their eyes locked. Lena's cold, calculating gaze met Claire's steady, unflinching stare. The room fell into a hush as the two women sized each other up, the tension palpable. The rustle of silk dresses and the faint scent of expensive perfume filled the charged silence. Without warning, Lena stepped forward, her voice low and sharp. "You're stirring trouble, Claire. This place is a delicate ecosystem. One wrong move and it all collapses." Claire's reply was calm but firm. "Maybe it's time it did." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Suddenly, Lena lunged, her hand shoving Claire's shoulder with a force that sent her stumbling back. A crystal glass toppled from a nearby table, shattering loudly on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the room, breaking the fragile calm. Gasps and startled cries erupted as patients and staff alike reacted to the sudden violence. Dr. Mallory appeared instantly, his composed demeanor faltering for a fraction of a second as he surveyed the scene. "Enough," he commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. But the damage was done, the tension had exploded. Claire steadied herself, eyes locked on Lena, who now wore a triumphant, dangerous smile. The room was no longer a sanctuary but a battleground. Alliances shifted, visibly some patients moved away, wary of choosing sides, while others whispered fervently, their loyalties tested. Jasper appeared at Claire's side, his usual nervous energy replaced with guarded concern. "You're shaking the foundation, Claire. Be careful, this could get ugly." She nodded, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily on her shoulders. This fracture in the rehab's delicate order was both a risk and an opportunity. The chaos that followed would either expose the truth she sought or bury her deeper in the shadows. Retreating to a shadowed corner, Claire's breath came in shallow bursts. The room buzzed with whispered speculations and pointed glances. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Every fractured alliance and whispered betrayal tightened the noose, but also illuminated the path she must take. Her mind raced. How far could she push before the walls closed in? Who could she rely on when everyone had secrets to hide? The stakes had never been higher, and the fractures within the rehab were only beginning to show. Claire's fingers curled into a fist. This was just the beginning. The controlled chaos beneath the silk would soon erupt, fully, and she had to be ready to survive it. The sun had slipped beneath the horizon, leaving a bruised purple sky that clung to the edges of the heavy clouds. She slipped past the manicured gardens, where manicured hedges gave way to a neglected corner. A forgotten patch of wilderness where the scent of wilted roses mixed with the sharp tang of earth and decay. There, nestled between the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, stood a small, weathered shed, its paint peeling like old skin and its door hanging slightly askew. Claire's heart pounded as she reached out, fingers brushing against the rough wood, the chill of the evening air crawling beneath her sleeves. With a soft creak, the door gave way, revealing darkness pierced by the fading light filtering through a cracked window. Inside, dust motes danced in the stale air, settling over forgotten tools and broken flower pots. Then, catching the glint of silver beneath a pile of dried leaves, Claire's eyes locked onto the delicate bracelet she had seen on Elena's wrist in old photographs. The thin chain was twisted and tangled, but the charmer tiny crescent moon was unmistakable. She held it up, the cool metal pressing into her palm, and a surge of hope coursed through her veins. This was no mere coincidence. Elena had been here. Maybe she still was. The weight of the bracelet in her hand was heavier than metal alone. It was a tangible link to the sister she thought she'd lost forever. A link to the secrets buried beneath the rehab's silk-smooth facade. Later, Claire found herself in the dim glow of the therapy room where Dr. Langston held court with clinical precision. The overhead light hummed quietly, its pulse steady as a metronome, matching the tension coiled in the room. Claire's voice was steady, carefully measured, as she asked questions that danced along the edges of truth, probing for anything that might betray the institution's carefully guarded secrets. Dr. Langston's gaze was impenetrable, his words polite yet evasive. He spoke of patient confidentiality, of progress, of setbacks, but never directly of Elena. Claire felt the walls closing in. The doctor was a gatekeeper, and she needed to find a way past him. Dinner in the grand dining hall was always a performance. The clink of fine china, the murmur of genteel conversation, the faint scent of jasmine from the floral arrangements. Claire sat near Mara, whose cold blue eyes never left her for long. There was a wordless tension between them, a dance of suspicion and reluctant alliance. Mara's silk scarves rustled softly as she shifted in her chair, eyes narrowing. "You're stirring the waters, Claire," Mara whispered later, voice barely audible. "Be careful what surfaces." Claire nodded, her mind racing. If Mara knew more, she had to tread lightly. Back in her room, the silk curtains filtered the moonlight into pale bands across the floor. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, Elena's bracelet clasped tightly in her fingers. The cold metal was a stark contrast to the warmth of her memories, the laughter, the fights, the fragile bond that had sustained them both. But beneath that warmth lurked the shadow of loss, and the creeping fear that the rehab held more than just broken souls. She was closer now, closer to the truth, and closer to danger. Claire's pulse quickened. Somewhere in this gilded cage, her sister's shadow moved, and Claire was determined to follow it, wherever it led. The night deepened, swallowing the rehab in quiet darkness, but Claire's resolve burned brighter than ever. The game had changed. The sister's shadow was no longer just a ghost of the past, it was a beacon, pulling her into the heart of the labyrinth, and Claire was ready to confront whatever lay at its center. Claire stepped out of the main building, her footsteps light against the polished stone of the secluded garden courtyard. The scent of jasmine hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint hum of distant traffic. It was here, far from the prying eyes of staff and patients. that she was to meet Evelyn Shaw, a woman rumored to possess knowledge that could shift the delicate balance of power within the rehab. Claire's heart thrummed beneath the practiced calm she wore like armor. She scanned the shadows, spotting a slender figure leaning against a wrought iron bench, the faint gleam of platinum hair catching what little moonlight filtered through the canopy. Evelyn's eyes, sharp and wary, met Claire's with a flicker of recognition and calculation. "You're late," Evelyn said, voice low but edged with impatience. "Traffic," Claire replied smoothly, masking the tension tightening her chest. They studied each other, two predators circling beneath the silk veil of civility that cloaked their surroundings. Evelyn's scarred face softened into a sardonic smile. "You don't look like the usual desperate types here." "I'm not," Claire answered, stepping closer. "I'm looking for answers." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "Answers come at a price." Inside the rehab's sterile library the next afternoon, Claire found herself surrounded by the cold scent of leather-bound books and the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Evelyn sat across from her, fingers drumming on the polished oak table, her expression unreadable. "I want to help you," Evelyn began, voice a whisper that barely disturbed the silence. "But I'm not charity. I need protection and influence." Claire weighed the offer carefully. Aligning with Evelyn could open doors, but also expose her to unpredictable risks. Still, the alternative was to remain adrift in a sea of secrets with no anchor. "We have a deal," Claire said finally, sealing an alliance born from necessity rather than trust. That night, lying in her plush room, Claire stared at the swirling shadows cast by the city skyline on the silk curtains. The silence pressed against her, echoing with the weight of the choices she had made. She knew Evelyn's price was steep, and the stakes higher than ever. Yet, buried beneath her doubts was a sliver of hope, a chance to find her sister, and perhaps to unravel the twisted web of control woven through the rehab. Days later, in the echoing vastness of the underground parking garage, the two women met again. The distant roar of engines and the echo of their footsteps heightened the urgency of their clandestine conversation. "I have it," Evelyn whispered, sliding a small USB drive across the hood of a sleek black car. "But once you open this door, there's no turning back." Claire's fingers closed around the device, the cold metal a stark contrast to the heat rising in her chest. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady despite the storm inside. In that moment, the fragile alliance between them crystallized, a precarious bridge over a chasm of secrets, lies, and danger. The game was changing, and Claire was no longer playing to blend in. She was playing to win. As the shadows deepened, so did the stakes, and the true cost of trust in a world built on deception began to reveal itself. The night whispered promises and threats, and Claire knew that every step forward was a step into the unknown, one where allies might become enemies, and the line between salvation and destruction blurred beneath the silk. With the USB drive burning a hole in her pocket and Evelyn's demands echoing in her mind, Claire prepared for the next move in a game where the prize was her sister's fate and possibly her own survival. The air was thick with controlled chaos, and beneath the silk-smooth facade of the rehab, the power games played on, ruthless and unrelenting. Claire's uneasy alliance was forged, but the question remained, could it hold against the storm coming for them all? And somewhere deep inside, Claire felt the first tremors of a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew. The night was far from over, and the game was only just beginning. The calm, polished veneer was now punctuated by the cold gleam of surveillance cameras blinking in calculated rhythms. The subtle but unmistakable presence of security personnel stationed at strategic points throughout the halls. Claire noticed it immediately. The morning after the incident, the whispers of tightened protocols had been true. She moved with practiced subtlety, each step calculated not to disturb the fragile balance she had been maintaining. The new cameras, sleek and unforgiving, scanned corridors with mechanical precision. Claire learned their patterns quickly. The pivot of a lens, the brief pause as it reset. She timed her movements accordingly, slipping through shadows and ducking behind ornate pillars draped in cascading silk curtains that fluttered faintly in the recycled air. The faint hum of the air conditioning mingled with the distant murmur of early risers, setting a background that both comforted and unnerved. Dr. Harrow's presence seemed to loom over the facility more heavily now, his gaze sharper, his questions more probing during therapy sessions. Claire felt the weight of his scrutiny like an invisible tether, reminding her that any falter in her facade could unravel everything. But it wasn't just the staff. The other patients had shifted too. The social landscape was charged with suspicion. Every whispered conversation and sideways glance a potential threat. In the common lounge, Claire found a moment of reprieve. The room was softly lit, sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that framed manicured gardens beyond. Classical music played low, its strings weaving a fragile sense of normalcy. Lena was there, perched on the edge of a velvet sofa, eyes sharp beneath her carefully arranged hair. Their previous interactions had been tentative, but necessity had forged a fragile alliance. Claire approached, offering a slight nod. Lena returned it with a subtle tilt of her head, their agreed signal. The coded glance exchanged between them carried the weight of unspoken plans and mutual guardedness. The room's muted elegance, juxtaposed with the undercurrent of tension, made every moment feel like a balancing act on a razor's edge. Security Chief Dalton was a looming presence throughout the facility. His broad frame and stern expression cut a figure of unyielding authority. Claire caught the sound of his boots, heavy, deliberate, echoing down the hallways. His gaze swept the patients and staff alike, stopping briefly on faces that betrayed even the slightest nervous twitch. Dalton wasn't just a man in uniform. He was a reminder of the iron grip the rehab center held over its inhabitants. One afternoon, as Claire traced the perimeter near the restricted wing, a sudden flicker of the overhead lights plunged part of the hallway into shadow. The emergency alarms blared, piercing the serene atmosphere with a shrill urgency. Heart pounding, Claire melted into the darkness, her breath shallow. The chaos was both a curse and a blessing, the perfect cover to slip past tightened security checkpoints. She moved quickly, guided by memorized layouts and the soft padding of her shoes against the cool marble floor. Every sense was heightened, the distant bark of a guard's command, the static buzz of a walkie-talkie, the faint scent of antiseptic mingling with expensive cologne. The moment stretched taut, seconds feeling like minutes, until the power returned and the alarms ceased. Claire had crossed into forbidden territory. Inside, the air was cooler, tinged with the faint chemical scent of cleaning agents and old secrets. She found a small alcove, concealed behind a tapestry depicting an idyllic countryside scene. Pulling out a worn notebook, she jotted down notes: the new security schedule, shift changes, camera blind spots. Each piece was a thread pulling her closer to the center's hidden truths. But the risks were mounting. The tightened surveillance meant one misstep could expose her. To counter this, Claire and Lena devised subtle distractions, whispered rumors sown among patients, staged arguments, the occasional misplaced item triggering security checks away from Claire's path. It was a dangerous game of misdirection, one that required constant vigilance and nerves of steel. During one of the therapy group sessions, Dr. Harrow's piercing gaze settled on Claire longer than usual. She felt the invisible weight of his suspicion, but managed to deflect with rehearsed vulnerability. The room hummed with forced calm as patients shared rehearsed confessions, the undercurrent of mistrust simmering beneath polite nods and measured words. At night, Claire lay awake, the silence broken only by the distant footsteps of guards and the occasional clink of glass from the lounge. The rehab, for all its luxury, felt like a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating at once. Every secret she uncovered seemed to reveal more dangers lurking beneath the silk-smooth surface. Yet Claire's resolve hardened. For her missing sister, for the truth, she would navigate this tightened web of surveillance and suspicion. She would become a ghost slipping through shadows, a master of evasion in a place designed to control every movement. As dawn approached, she whispered to herself, "No one will catch me. Not here, not now." But somewhere in the depths of the rehab, eyes watched and waited, and the game was far from over. The silence shattered again, footsteps approaching. Claire's breath caught. The hunt was intensifying, and she was the prey.